Hello guys, this is your friend Dark Fox 2.0 and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is what if Naruto got massive harem with female Kyuubi, Kurenai, Tsunade, Tifa, Katt movie part 1. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. As the Kyuubi watched in growing horror as its power was drained, massive amounts of its blood-red chakra seeping from its massive body, torn away painfully, only to be absorbed by the small, silent blonde child in the middle of the massive room. It surrounded him in a vicious vortex, creating a miniature tornado of power with its chakra. The Kyuubi roared in agony as its power was stripped from it, but changed to screams as it grew smaller in size as its power deteriorated. Once it reached the size of a horse, it began to glow red with its chakra, before taking a humanoid form. As the light died down, the Kyuubi's true form was revealed. Crimson hair the color of fresh blood spilled down its back past its thighs, where it lay pooled around its kneeled form. A large bun lay at the back of its skull, holding much of its hair back. Holding the bun together were two pairs of hair pins. They were 9 inches in length, and each was tapered to a point, much like that of a senbon needle, while at their opposite ends, small kitsune heads sat. 2 of them were pitch black in color, the kitsune head's eyes having small, red rubies for eyes, while the other 2 were pure white, and held small, blue sapphires for eyes, and their colors violently contrasted with one another. The pins were placed so that they crossed one another, the 2 black pins near the top of the bun, the 2 white pins placed at the bottom. The crossing created an X shape, the black pins the top points of the X, the white pins the bottom 2 points of the X. While this made one massive X, the individual pins crisscrossed one another as well, creating 2 pairs of smaller X's. Thought the bun hid this double feature from sight, revealing only the bigger, easier seen X. As the chakra disappeared completely, the rest of its form was revealed. Eyes the color of rubies, with pitch black, vertical slits for pupils, held horror, fear, apprehension, and, though it was hidden, slight curiosity. They were outlined in black, the edges thicker and darker, and tapered to a point at their ends. Think of Naruto's eyes after he enters his one-tail mode. Her face was very beautiful, with a healthy tan for a complexion, and no blemishes. Along her cheeks ran 3 pitch black slash marks similar to that of her host's, though hers were thicker, and started at the ends of her cheeks, and tapered to a point. Naruto's marks after attaining his one-tail mode. She held an incredible bust, around an F cup, and wrapped tightly around her hourglass figure was a blood-red kimono outlined in gold, while gold slash marks, 1 foot in length, ran the length of the cloth from its shoulder, chest, waist, and to the ends of her sleeves. However, the kimono itself was stretched to the limits due to her bust size, though it made her all the more desirable. However, despite her beauty, the look on her face was anything but alluring. The horrified look on her face, however, could mostly likely be attributed to not the child she was facing, but the dark silhouette towering behind him. Though her bloodline allowed her massive power and many advantages in battle, her other gift, that of being born with a unique condition, had helped her survive just as well as her bloodline. This gift was that of foresight. It allowed for her to see the future, though it was through small glimpses, and only things that would affect her, no matter how much she tried willing it to be used whenever she desired. The future self of her host, however, terrified her to her very core. It stood over 6.5 feet tall, the shadow-covered form towering not only over the boy, but even her 6'1" frame as well. Judging from its mass, it was built heavily in muscle, ones that were thick and sleek, designed for speed, but also able to provide huge amounts of raw strength, even when they were compacted. While such features were intimidating, they would never normally give Kyuubi a reason to pause. The many 9-foot, pitch black tails fanning out from behind its back, along with the black kitsune ears at the top of its head that made her worried. However, even beyond even Theseus' features, it was the monster's eyes she feared the most. They were a deep, dark shade of crimson, much darker than even her own, and held a pitch-black vertical slit pupil in the middle of its eye. Its eyes radiated so much rage, hatred, and bloodlust that she was actually frozen in place. She, the Kyuubi no Kitsune, frozen in place by a mere child's possible future self. It was ludicrous. No joy, no happiness, no sign of even a sliver of positive emotion. The only thing his eyes spoke of was death. Death was the small whisper that escaped the child's lips. Death to the traitors. Death to the hypocrites. Death to my father. The blonde whispered, though he spat the father like one would a curse. Death to these bastards for what they've done to me. I won't be their punching bag anymore. The blonde muttered, before stopping suddenly. Zero. No. I think it's time this village sees the difference between the Kyuubi no Kitsune and Naruto Uzumaki, the village sacrifice, he replied calmly. As he lifted his head to stare into Kyuubi's own eyes, she felt herself shiver at his new appearance. Cold, dead cerulean eyes with a vertical, pitch-black slit for a pupil's bored into her own. The 3 whisker marks on each of his cheeks had elongated and thickened into slash marks, and darkened until they were black. Once again, think one-tail mode Naruto's whisker marks. He had a great increase in his muscle mass, his former malnutrition-suffering body now bulked up and covered in sleek, toned muscle. His height had increased several inches, giving him an extra 6 inches to his short frame, making him one of the tallest children of his age group. His hair had grown out and lengthened considerably, and red chakra solidified at the back of his neck, creating a small, red ring that held his blonde hair in a small ponytail at the base of his neck, while in the front, it lay spiked up while flowing backwards, think Virgil's hairstyle from Devil May Cry, and on his forehead a large, horizontal line several inches in length was revealed. Ever so slowly, the line began to thicken, the spread, showing a third eye. With a vertical black slit for a pupil, and a deep purple color, darker than a violet color covered the rest of it. It held no retina or aorta, nothing but purple, and a slit splitting the single-colored eye. My bloodline. He absorbed it. But how? Were Kyuubi's frantic thoughts at this new development. After all, her third eye, the Jagan, was indeed powerful, but it was not a bloodline that normal demons contained. Only those of the Kitsune clan held the bloodline. And even then, only a select, lucky few were able to activate it, let alone use it to its full potential. Any idiot could be born with ultimate power, but if they couldn't use it, then what was the point? Kyuubi herself knew of only 3 other demons who wielded the Jagan's full power effectively. Her parents, and fire demon named Hyaya who had one transplanted into himself, after killing the Kitsune who had just activated it were the only others she knew of that held an activated and controlled Jagan, though it seemed she would have to add her container to the list as well. The power he was putting out is terrifying, even if he was just a child. Her own Jagan itself had activated, though it was more out of interest than fear. Absorbing my memories and Yuki is one thing, but, to be able to absorb my bloodline as well. If this child ever receives proper training, he could become a god amongst shinobi. Hell, he could even surpass me in sheer power, was the realization she came to after the shock of seeing her bloodline activated in a human. Wait. Oh hell, was all Kyuubi could mutter to herself as her mind went temporarily numb, and she stared at the new, appendages adorning her container. This, temporarily mind-blanketing could be attributed to the pair of pitch-black fax ears with golden tips nestled in the blonde's hair. The other cause of temporary brain failure may have been the 4.5 foot long pitch-black, golden-tipped kitsune tails waving gently to and fro behind him, coming directly out of the bottom of his spine, near his tailbone. So, Kyuubi, came the quiet voice of the young Sanbi, 3-tail kitsune in front of her, jerking Kyuubi away from her thoughts and back to reality. With a small smile that showed his new fangs, thought it contained little humor, and gave the female demon an ultimatum. You can be free of this seal. You may be out of your cage and allowed free range in my mind right now, but you're not free of the seal itself. I may allow you to roam free and unrestrained, though you will be under my complete control anyway. Or, well, I can kill you now, and save myself the trouble of having to deal with you any longer. It's your choice, of course. However, there are certain, shall we say, advantages to being under my care. Kyuubi was still somewhat shocked, of course, that her host was even considering to give her such freedom, as the child had every right to kill her. While the deal held merit, what made her actually begin to consider it was his tone. It was calm, collected, slightly smug, and, to her embarrassment, a hint of seduction was also present. She narrowed her eyes, however, as there had to be a catch to this deal. Why though, my container? Why would you give me freedom? After all, I'm a demon, and we can't always be trusted. With slight widening of his smile, the blonde's eyes lit up in slight, sadistic glee. Because, Kyuubi-chan, Kyuubi felt herself blush slightly at the affection given to her name. I need a guardian, a mentor. I may have your power and memories, thought the majority of it's locked away until I'm strong enough to access it and have the experience to use my power to its full extent. That is what I want you for. Train me and be free, or refuse, and I'll kill you. Sighing to herself but chuckling slightly, Kyuubi gave her reply with a sadistic grin of her own. As you wish, Naruto-sama. The demon replied with a smug grin. Lifting his hand up, Naruto beckoned to Kitsune with his finger. Come to me, Kyuubi-chan. With an oath of blood will you be rebound to me, until death, Kyuubi, and in return, you shall be given the freedom you have sought from this accursed seal. As she approached him with a sensual sway to her hips, she mentally pouted as he showed no reaction to her blatant flirting. Any other male would have gone into cardiac arrest, and it was impressive that he hadn't even lost a drop of blood. Regardless of his age, he should have been unconscious from bloodless. Oh well, I'll just wait until he's older. After all, I've never met a male that could terrify me to the point of being submissive. It's making me feel hot. How shall this pact be made, Naruto-sama? The pact that tethers my soul with your own using the Shiki Fuin is a pact with a Shinigami. How do you intend to break it? Kyuubi questioned lightly with a slight smirk. She was intensely curious about what kind of pact could break such a powerful one. Simple, Kyuubi-chan. You make a more powerful pact, one that will outweigh the Shinigami's pact. With a small smile, Naruto removed his black shirt, and then his under armor. Bite me. He replied simply. Why the hell do you want me to bite you? The confused demon growled out in shock, before snapping her mouth shut as her container held up a hand to silence her. Right here. This is where I want you to bite. He paused, pointing at the juncture between his neck and shoulder on his right. After my blood is absorbed into your system, a new seal will be used to bind you to me, and it will easily destroy the contract the Shinigami has with my father that is used to seal you currently. Very well, child, Kyuubi replied. She then sank to her knees, kneeling low enough to look him straight in the eyes, and she searched them for any signs of hesitation. She found none. Moving her eyes down to the blonde's neck, she stared at the juncture that he had pointed out before. Narrowing her eyes slightly, Kyuubi licked her lips slowly before opening her mouth to reveal her fangs. She then slowly craned her neck down and placed her fangs on his neck, before gently piercing his throat with her fangs. Feeling the warm, coppery, and surprising sweet flavor of her container's blood on her tongue, she swallowed it with a small gulp. Immediately after she had ingested the child's blood, all hell broke loose. Konoha, Hokage's office. 5 minutes before, Dame paperwork. Sarutobi snarled under his breath. He knew being Hokage was great and all. The prestige, the power, the money. But of course, they forgot to mention the bane of all leaders, paperwork. Not only that, but the stacks were growing. He didn't know how, but they were, oh yes they were. Dame Minato, leaving me with the paperwork after he goes off and dies to seal the Kyuubi. The brat did it on purpose, I just know it. He mumbled to himself. As you can see, paperwork can make people crazy. Now, not only was the Hokage pissed off at having to fill out paperwork, but his hangover from the other night wasn't helping matters in any way. Please, please, please. I don't care what it is, invading foreign shinobi, the apocalypse, monkeys jumping on trampolines, just something, anything, get me the hell away from this dame paperwork from hell. The Sandame sobbed with giant anime tears streaming down his face, until he felt it. Dark, bloodthirsty chakra, far more powerful than anything he had felt before, crashed down onto him. The killing intent alone was nearly driving him to his knees due to its pressure. What the hell is this? I haven't felt something like this since the Q. Oh by Kami, please no. The seal couldn't have broken. But nevertheless, I have to find out why this is happening. He thought to himself, before jumping out of his window and rushing towards the source of the malicious chakra. As Sarutobi stopped a few houses away from Naruto's home, he watched in shock and horror as a maelstrom of blood-red chakra swirled violently around the child's apartment, kicking up winds and dust, and shielding whatever was happening inside. As the aging Kage watched silently, AMVs surround a single squad of Chunin, who from the looks of them had been in a fight recently, judging from the blood splattered over their uniform. Shit. Was the only words he could utter as he came to a horrifying conclusion. They had to have attacked Naruto, and the chakra tornado that had formed, that meant the Kyuubi was most likely healing Naruto, or it was using its Yuki to try and escape its prison. However, as he was about to command Anbu to back him up, the chakra tornado died down, and the killing intent all but vanished. Now, however, the chakra had become concentrated, almost as if it was trying to hit itself. Taking a glance at two of his platoons, Sarutobi discreetly motioned for two of the captains, identifiable by the red ribbons around their arms. One held a white Inu mask and had spiky, silver hair, and the other held a white Neko mask, with long, purple hair that reached mid-back. As both captains approached, they saluted their Kage and stood at attention awaiting his orders. Stand down. Both relaxed, but still held the tenseness of a trained shinobi, ready to fight at a moment's pause. What are your orders, Hokage-sama? Both captains asked in unison. Hold yourself in reserve behind me, and follow. However, do not, I repeat, do not attack Naruto under any circumstances, unless I give specific orders. If he's safe, but afraid and is using the Kyuubi's chakra on instinct, then I'll calm him down. If the Kyuubi's controlling him, then I'll try to reason with it. If not, then I will try to do what is necessary for this village. Yes sir. Both Anbu saluted, before following their leader as he landed in front of Naruto's apartment door. Quietly opening the door to the youth's apartment, and they found themselves sickened at its condition. Clothing was thrown around, holes dotted the walls, kunai still lay embedded into the floor and walls mortar, a table was broken in half down the middle, the window to his left was shattered, and to his growing horror, the area was quite literally painted with blood, streaks on the walls, splatters at the windows, and there were puddles all over the place, the largest several feet in length, which sat in the middle of his living room. However, it gave him some hope when he saw bloody foot and hand prints, streaking towards the child's bedroom. Sarutobi prayed to Kami that Naruto was still alive, as it seemed even after losing so much blood, he was able to crawl to his room. As the old man crept towards the room's door, he stopped dead in his tracks as a massive chakra signature appeared on the other side of the door, one that far outclassed his own. Giving a signal to his Anbu, he gently twisted the door's handle, and pushed it open. The sight that met his eyes made his heart stop in fear. Well, not really evil per se, but not exactly a bubbling fountain of joy either. He's going to be ruthless in getting what he wants. He's not going to be nice. He kill you just as soon as talk to you. He's going to threaten, bribe, and slaughter anyone that gets in his way. He's intelligent, seen too much of the world's darker side to be innocent anymore, and he's not going to take shit from anyone, even if they could kill him in a heartbeat. Not that he's arrogant, just comfortable with his ability to fight, and sick of being the world's scapegoat. All the fun stuff that the real Naruto should do and deserves to do, but never does because he's too damn nice. This Naruto's going to be one hell of a badass nightmare to a lot of people. And I mean a lot of people. Just how strong is Naruto going to be? Well, it will take him a while, over a decade and a half, but he will eventually be able to outclass even Kyuubi herself. This is not an instant god mode Naruto, this is a Naruto who has trained hard and has earned his power. Also, no, he is not going to travel dimensions. There may be an item world where he can train, not sure if I'll put it in though. He will visit Makai, the demon world, and the nations laying outside the elemental countries, but that's about it. How old is he? 6. After his training trip is done, a little older than 21. More on this trip will be explained as the series progresses. Like this chapter. Yes. This means he will leave the village. I feel sorry for the idiots who'll get in his way, insert evil laugh. Mhuahahahaha. Sorry about the laugh, couldn't help myself. For who's in the harem? There will be no Naruto x Sakura. End of discussion. I don't like her, she was too much of a bitch to Naruto, in canon, so I don't think it would be healthy for him to have to deal with her. Also, there will be no yaoi. So fangirls asking for it, stop pestering me. You're not going to get it. For the Naruto x Kyuubi pairing, several people are wondering why they're so friendly with one another, like he calls her Chan and she calls him Sama, and they don't hate each other's guts. He uses Chan because she's close to him, and always has been. It's more of her being sealed in him, than actually affection. Well, for now, anyway. For Kyuubi, she calls him Sama, master, because of her respect for him. I can't think of any kids that have the guts to threaten a demon with death, especially when this particular one is the strongest of its kind. She sees that as strength, and respects it. For the rest of the harem's choices, I guess I'll let you fans have it. All of the Naruto females' characters will show up eventually in the story, which includes the filler arcs and movies. Also, be warned, there will be several characters that will have become OC. Look up Anti-Assassingai to get a feel to what a female versions of certain males in the series would act like. It's really funny. Also, Haku will be female in this story. Even if the anime and manga said Haku was a guy, the looks and the voice say he was a chick. So that's how it's going to be. It's fanfiction, so if you don't like a female Haku, well, too bad. How do you like them apples? They're good covered in caramel, aren't they? Also, if there are any male characters from the various animes, games, or movies you want to suggest for part of the story, feel free to ask for them as seats turned into girls. I might be funny. Maybe. This bears looking into. Also, once again, any female characters from other series, like the ones I've stated or ones you want to show up, feel free to request them in your reviews. Not that you have to or anything. I'm not forcing you to read this story. For your viewing pleasure, I'll put a poll at the bottom where those lucky females that have been chosen by you, my readers, to be put in the harem. Just send me who you want. If one of your characters is already there, then perhaps request what their use in this story is. It will make it easier on me. Really. I think. Meh. Sigh. Speech. Go jump off a cliff. You're taking up my valuable oxygen with your incessant yelling. Thoughts. If you choke a smurf, what color will it turn? Demon speech. I hate you, brat. Demon thoughts. Why am I talking to myself? Techniques, jutsu, super flashy destruction no jutsu. Locations, time, wherever I want, whenever I please. On with the story. Last time, since I gave you guys a cliffhanger and most likely pissed off quite a few of you. As the old man crept towards the room's door, he stopped dead in his tracks as a massive chakra signature appeared on the other side of the door, one that far outclassed his own. Giving a signal to his Anbu, he gently twisted the door's handle, and pushed it open. The sight that met his eyes made his heart stop in fear. An incredibly beautiful and attractive woman with blood-red hair sat in a kneeling position, a crimson kimono with gold highlights wrapped tightly around her body, both showing of her curves and an incredible bust, one that could easily beat that of his former student Tsunade's chest, and it highlighted her hair and red eyes. It was opened slightly at the front, giving a good V shape that revealed some of her cleavage. A thick, black choker, though it looked more like a dog collar, was clasped around her neck, and a pure white chain was attached to its front, while trailing down several feet to the floor, before snaking its way up her right thigh and into Naruto's small hand. The child himself was seated on her lap, snuggled securely against her body, the back of his head resting comfortably on her. She had her arms wound around his neck in a comforting manner, as if both protecting him and to show affection. Naruto's unoccupied left hand was resting on her other thigh, slight stroking the fabric of her kimono, while his new ears twitched each time the woman's breath caressed them, and 4.5 foot long pitch black tails with gold tops sprouting from his back were curled around the woman's waist. Sarutobi was apprehensive about Naruto's new changes, but the blood-red kitsune ears with gold tips, and the 9 lengthy red tails with gold tips fanning out from the women's back scared him a hell of a lot more than Naruto's new appendages. As Naruto calmly gazed at the rapidly paling Hokage, a small glint made its way to his icy, slitted blue eyes as he calculated the odds of himself and Kyuubi surviving now that she was out of the seal. However, a sudden thought came to him, and a devious plan began to manifest in his brain at how he could use the situation to his and Kyuubi's advantage. Hey, old man. Startled out of his thoughts, said old man glanced down at Naruto's face, and began to sweat at the look on his face. He was frowning slightly, but it was scaring him more that he would readily admit. I think you and me need to talk. Especially about Kyuubi-chan. Kyuubi-chan, squeaked out the Hokage, both confused and terrified that he was referring to a creature of unparalleled power and as bloodthirsty as they come with a term of endearment. Hi, I believe it's time I learned the whole story about the Kyuubi attack, such as why I, an orphan, was chosen as a sacrifice to become Kyuubi-chan's prison, and not another newborn child, such as one that had a family. In return for such information, I will tell you why Kyuubi-chan is free, and why Konoha is in no danger. Well, unless you piss me off, of course. Then I'll just let Kyuubi-chan slaughter you all. Would you like that? Questioned the blonde quietly as he tilted his head up to look at Kyuubi, who smiled viciously, baring her fangs at the humans in front of her. Oh yes, indeed I would. Only with your permission, of course. She spoke back quietly enough so that the shinobi in front of her wouldn't hear her. She'd gotten the double meaning of his words, but the others present hadn't. Of course. The blonde replied quietly, before turning back to his guests, his own face lighting up with a psychotic and bloodthirsty grin, one that eerily resembled the Kyuubi's. As such, the Sandaime and the Anbu were scared shitless. Before we discuss this in my office, Naruto-kun, who is the woman behind you? Sarutobi asked, though he hoped Naruto couldn't detect the slight tremor in his voice. After all, the boy had incredible detection skills. Losing his smile, Naruto simply gazed coolly at the trio, and only a small upturn of his lips signified his amusement at the question. You don't know. You really don't know. Shame really. You would think that the whisker marks and blood-red eyes would help. Hell, even the kitsune ears and 9 tails coming out of her spine would be clue enough, he replied dryly. At the trio's confused looks, or postures, in the ANVs cases, the child's eye twitched a bit in irritation, and with a sigh gave them his answer. The hot women I'm currently using as a seat as the Kyuubi no Kitsune, you twits. The confused shinobi stared for a bit, before Sarutobi's mind couldn't take any more stress for the day, and promptly shut down. Included in the fainting was his 2 Anbu captains, Yugo Azuki and Kakashi Hatake, who despite both being freshly instated as an Anbu captain, and working as one for several years, respectively, they had seen and been subjugate to too much shit for one day, and promptly collapsed and joined their Hokage in the La La Land. Both Naruto and Kyuubi sweat dropped as the 3 adults slumped bonelessly to the floor in a dead faint. Was it something said? The blonde questioned innocently. 10 minutes later, Sarutobi groaned as he regained consciousness and tried to remember what the hell happened, with little success. His musings were cut short as he felt a small foot kicking him hard in the side. Oi, wake the hell up, old man. We got business to get to and information to explain and share. Wake the hell up, Naruto all but screamed into his ear, nearly deafening him, along with emphasizing each word with a harder kick to the ribs. I'm up, shouted Sarutobi as he slowly climbed to his feet, staggering slightly due to his mental facilities still trying to reboot from his fainting spell, and the deafening of his eardrums, courtesy of an overly loud and impatient blonde. He noticed he was in his office after checking his surroundings, and gratefully collapsed into his overly large and extremely comfy chair, before turning his gaze to the pair of kitsune. Kyuubi herself was seated sedately in a chair in front of his desk, her smooth legs crossed in front of her, and her lap had been confiscated and was being used as a seat again for Naruto. This time, while her arms were encircled around his neck, her head rested lightly on top of the blonde's, watching not only the Hokage himself, but her ears twitched occasionally and swiveled around, listening to both Naruto, and for intruders, or anyone else that was stupid enough to interrupt them. Sarutobi felt his eye twitch, however, when Naruto's attention was not on him, considering the blonde had kicked him awake, but was preoccupied with one of Kyuubi's fluffy tails. He held it lightly in his lap, and was running his hands through the fur, its coloring similar to that of fresh spilt blood, and it looked like he was enjoying himself immensely with the activity. Kyuubi herself also seemed to enjoy it, with the glazed-over look in her eyes, and the small blush flittered across her face, though neither of them noticed, and squirmed slightly in her seat while being barely able to bite back a moan as he hit a very sensitive part of her tail. So, why is the Kyuubi out of the seal, but not a threat to Konoha, Naruto-kun? The man questioned lightly. Naruto answered vaguely as he looked up from the tail he was playing with, not registering Sarutobi's question, or that his stroking was having interesting effects on Kyuubi. Oh yeah, several emotions flew across his face, going from surprise, to deep thought, and then revelation. Well, some stupid, idiotic, lame bastards of Konoha Chunin decided it would be a good idea to break into my home, trash the place, torture me for a while, and then try to kill me. I blacked out after they finally gave up trying to kill me by ramming kunai through my heart, lungs, stomach, and brain, or simply trying to get me to bleed to death, before the next thing I know I'm in front of Kyuubi's cage. He stopped to take a breath, before continuing. I, being stupid at the time, asked who she was, and she told me who she was and all about the ceiling. She then offered to slaughter everyone in the village if I released her, and I did. Unfortunately for her, I just so happened to be so pissed off at the moment at this village for what they've done to me, that I decided she wasn't going to destroy it. Only I have the privilege of seeing Konoha burn. So, somehow I absorbed her powers and memories, and she reverted to her true, human-like form, the one I'm currently sitting on. I then gave her a choice. She could either be completely free of the seal that bound her to me, somewhat, and teach me to use my new power, or die. She chooses freedom, so here we are. The blonde finished. What was the exact deal you made, Naruto? As far as I know, she was sealed using the Shinigami's Shiki Fuin seal and the Yondaime soul, and I was told escape would be impossible, and she would die when you would die. Easily. The blonde replied smoothly with a small grin, though there was little humor present in it. I created a new pact between us. She was bound inside of me, but the new deal still keeps her soul bound to my own soul, but allows her to have complete access to the outside world. For all intents and purposes, Kyuubi's basically my slave. She can walk around outside in the real world, eat and drink to her heart's content. Hell, she can go on a killing spree if she wanted to, so long as I give consent. However, if she goes against my orders or tries to betray or kill me, the seals on the collar around her neck will activate and immobilize her with pain. Each seal is represented by a different kanji, each inscribed into the collar by my blood, burned into the leather, and have become permanent seals. Each of the seals represents different parts of the pact. The kanji for mind represents her thoughts, allowing me to read hers anytime I wish, but only if the seal itself senses hostile thoughts about me. The kanji for body represents her physical body itself, her real one, and I control this through pain, as I can torture her if she disobeys me. The kanji for soul tethers her own to mine, forming a permanent link that connects us, and this bond allows me to know exactly where she is, as well as modifying the part where her soul would have been devoured by the Shinigami, but is now chained to me permanently. The final kanji, blood, represents the full pact between us itself, which binds her will to mine. Her body, her mind, and her soul are bent to my will. I can torture her for anything I want, but I can also give her the greatest pleasure by allowing her to kill and slaughter. Her will is completely bent to my own, but she has her body back and is outside in the real world. Solitude in the darkness, or servitude in the light. What would you have chosen, old man? Sarutobi was awed at not only the complexity of the pact, but also how enticing Naruto had made it seem, considering the circumstances between the two. He himself would most likely taken to become a slave, if for no other reason than for his sanity. Solitude or servitude indeed. So then, Naruto, you wished to know why you were chosen to be the Kyuubi's prison? He asked nervously. Correct. I want to know if it was for a noble cause, or a total bullshit answer such as no one cares about an orphan, so that's why I was picked. Sort of cliché, don't you believe? Sighing to himself, Sarutobi wearily left his chair and approached the previous cage's portraits, before stopping in front of the Yondaime's frame. Forgive me for what your legacy is about to learn, Minato. I don't think he'll forgive you for cursing him with such a burden. Let us both hope, however, that he doesn't level the village after he sees why you choose him as the vessel. Forming several hand seals, Sarutobi slammed his hand into the painting while discharging chakra, and a set of bright green seals appeared on the portrait, before a section of the wall next to it melted away, revealing a small scroll. Taking the scroll, Sarutobi turned to Naruto, before gently tossing it to him. Naruto caught it easily, before leveling a slightly confused gaze on the old man. Read it, Naruto. The old man sighed deeply in reply. Nodding, the blonde unraveled the scroll and began to read, while Kyuubi rested her head on his shoulder and read as well, interested in the reason her master was chosen to be her prison, while there had to have been many children that could have been used just as easily as he was. As the minutes passed by, Sarutobi grew concerned, and even a bit frightened. Naruto had yet to make a sound, and the Kyuubi was staring at the scroll with undistinguished horror, while her tanned face was becoming paler and paler until she was nearly chalk white, and, was that a whimper? Turning her head to stare out the sides of her eyes, Kyuubi gulped as she gazed fearfully at her master, awaiting his reaction to the information contained inside the scroll. He, ha 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 ha. Ha 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 ha. Ha 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 ha. Ha 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 ha. Was the small chuckle, and then full-blown psychotic laughter coming from Naruto's mouth. Now then, we all know that laughter is a good thing, of course. But, this is Naruto we're talking about, and since when has anything been normal with him? Whether it be canon Naruto or fanfiction Naruto, when he starts laughing, you better run for the hills, cause chances are, you're either going to get pranked, or he'll slit your throat with a happy grin on his face. So of course, dear readers, watching a 6-year-old Naruto laughing his of would be funny, but a 6-year-old Naruto laughing with a psychotic grin on his face and a maniacal gleam in his eyes which had become blood red in his anger, and leaking so much killing intent that poor, small, fluffy animals, such as a cute, bushy-tailed squirrel, immediately died as the poor animal's heart exploded from terror. So, old man. How many know, huh? How many people in this soon-to-be wiped of the face of the earth-forsaken village know I'm the bastard's son, huh? How many? Sarutobi, roared out an enraged Naruto, his voice changing from its normal dead tone to a gruff, deeper one, filled with bloodlust and demanding vengeance. At the mention of his full name, Sarutobi winced. Naruto only used his real name and not old man when he was either serious, or extremely angry. He was going to go with the secondary option. The killing intent alone most likely helped influence that theory. How many kami damned, shit-faced soon-to-be dead know I'm the bastard Yondaimi's son? Naruto spat out. Sarutobi had taken on shinobi armies, enemy cages, Orochimaru, and his dreaded paperwork, but nothing quiet terrified him more than Naruto's appearance right now. His eyes had gone from glacial orbs to blood red, while anger, hatred, and rage were the only things present in his slitted eyes. Inch-long claws had extended from his fingertips, and they cracked as he flexed them from closed fists to open palms. Pitch black, almost void kitsune ears with gold tips sat straight up on his head, while his canines had lengthened and thickened, forming fangs that stretched out of his mouth and down his bottom lip, his mouth currently bared in a snarl. His make that 4 tails thrashed around him in a flurry of erratic motion. Wherever they traveled along the floor they gouged out trenches, and wherever they hit they left demolished craters, whether it be the ceiling, walls, or the floor. It seems he's grown another tail in his rage. He must have unconsciously tapped into his Yuki stores and used them to make himself stronger. Interesting, Kyuubi thought to herself, and while she was alarmed at Naruto's power level, she was far more interested in his seemingly rapid growth. The swirling torrent of blood-red Yuki and the ever-increasing killing intent could help in seeing why Sarutobi was so scared. Currently, he compared Naruto to an enraged demon from hell, no pun intended. Taking a deep breath, the Sandaime quietly answered the enraged boy's question. The entire council, my 2 former teammates, who are now the 2 highest advisors besides me on the council, the heads of the major Konoha clans, along with Danzo and his root unit, a few older Anbu members, and my 3 former students, the Sannin, made up of Jiraiya, Orochimaru, and Tsunade. Their apprentices, Anko Mitarashi and Shizune may know, but I'm not sure. Several Jonin and Tokubetsu Jonin know, and so do a few of our Chunin, but beyond that, your heritage was kept a secret, though the knowledge of your tenant is known by most of the civilian and shinobi population, though the youngest children and the majority of our genin are unaware. Immediately after his last words, the chakra storm died down, and the killing intent was ruthlessly crushed. Naruto's normal features returned, his claws and fangs retracting, and the red color of his eyes receded, giving way to his natural deep blue eyes, but lacked any sort of warmth, nothing more than a pair of ice-chipped eyes, dead to the world. You have 2 choices, Sarutobi. You either let me leave Konoha without any trouble, or I'll leave anyway, but I'll carve a bloody path through anyone who gets in my way, including you. Your choice. The blonde spoke, though his voice was just as dead as his eyes. Looking at the boy, the elderly man sighed in disappointment, as he knew that Naruto would keep his word to kill anyone that would try and keep him in this village, and with the Kyuubi on a short leash and at his command, he could make his words a reality quite easily. When will you leave? 2 hours, West Gate. Let's go, Kyuubi-chan. We both need supplies, and I need equipment and clothing. As you wish, Naruto-sama. Kyuubi replied to her container, before both of them quietly left his office. Watching them depart, Sarutobi sighed to himself, before placing his head in his hands as he cursed the Yondaime for what he had done to his son. However, now that the boy was leaving, he'd do everything he could to at least allow him to leave peacefully. It was the least he could do for failing the fourth's legacy. Outside the Hokage Tower. So, where will we be shopping for our supplies for our travels, Naruto-sama? Questioned Kyuubi to her smaller master. To the best shinobi shop in Konoha, then the best weapons shop. After all, now that I'm going to be taught by you, there's no way in hell I'm going to put up with the same shit these bastards have been giving me. Also, have fun to terrify anyone you see fit. The bastards deserve it, after all. Hi, Naruto-sama. Kyuubi replied before a feral grin made its way across her face, and she unleashed her killing intent upon the insects who dared cause her container misery and pain. Her grin widened in satisfaction as hatred and disgust that had once run rampant on the faces of many villagers and shinobi vanished, to be replaced by paling faces shrouded in fear. The looks only intensified as she removed the genjutsu on herself that had been cast only minutes before, revealing her kitsune ears and 9 tails, and she continued to smile viciously as she followed behind her calmly walking container. She was expecting them to run screaming, but it appeared they were now so terrified they couldn't even walk. How pathetic. Here it is. Naruto spoke as he stopped in front of a large shop. Surprised at arriving so quickly, the strongest Biju brought her gaze to the shop to her left, one that advertised amazing, high-quality equipment for competitive prices. Entering the shop, both of them were greeted by a middle-aged man with a scar across his face. Hello there. Whatcha looking foe? As soon as the man's sight landed on Naruto, he immediately scowled. How dare that little hell spawn come waltzing into his shop as if he owned the place? I don't sell shinobi equipment to minors, and I sure as hell don't sell them to demon brats like you. Get out of my shop, brat, before I yuck. The rest of his sentence was cut off, as well as his air supply, as a clawed hand wrapped itself around his throat tightly to silence him, courtesy of an enraged Kyuubi. Lifting the man up and slamming him into a wall with enough strength to send several racks of Anbu armor clattering to the floor, she began applying pressure as she squeezed the man's throat, to show her displeasure at the shop owner's attitude towards her master. Listen up, you pathetic bag of flesh, she hissed, because I'm only going to say this once. You will treat Naruto-sama with respect, or I'll tear you throat out and then hunt down the rest of your pathetic family so I can slaughter them. Naruto-sama is here to gather some equipment before we leave this pathetic hellhole, and you'll never see us again, she growled, before continuing. Everything we take will be of no cost to us, and you won't make a sound until we leave, is that clear, mortal? She spat, baring her fangs in a snarl at the now sweating shopkeeper. She received a faint, terrified nod while he tried gurgling out a reply. She'd gotten the answer she wanted, and proceeded to drop him like a sack full of bricks. With a final glare that cowered the whimpering owner, Kyuubi turned around and watched silently as her master proceeded to find what he wanted for their journey. His own eyes swept the racks and walls with a calculating gaze, and he snatched several dark-colored cloths and quickly vanished into one of the changing rooms. When he had returned several minutes later, she raised an eyebrow as she took in his new attire, and her lips quirked up slightly in a smile at just how good he looked, considering his age. Black combat boots covered his feet, and were covered with small white shinguard plates. Black and gray camouflaged pants covered him from the waist down, and the slight jingle they gave off as he walked towards her betrayed their extra protection, as it seemed they'd had chain mail sewn under the 2 layers of cloth. The cloth itself also helped insulate him from both water and for trapping and releasing heat. A steel fishnet shirt covered his torso and biceps, while a miniaturized Junin vest, pith black in color, covered his chest and back, but had been left unzipped, allowing for his abs and chest to be examined. Black, fingerless gloves with metal plates on their backs covered his hands, while black, Anbu-style gauntlets covered his arms. Wrapped around his waist was a medic nin's belt, carrying pouches that could be used to hold supplies or medical tools. A black headband completed the look, hiding his jagged eye and keeping his hair out from his eyes. The kid was going to be one hell of a lady killer when he got older, if he looked this good as a child. And Kyuubi was going to take an interest in making him into a clueless one that would make any female swoon, but be a complete innocent. For a while, anyway. It would be a hell of a lot of fun. Turning his own gaze to Kyuubi, Naruto asked her a question. Anything you want. Kyuubi blinked in surprise, before a large grin split her face, and she immediately began happily rummaging through the women's section, and he waited silently for her as she vanished with an armload of clothing into the females' fitting section. A quarter of an hour later he had his answer for his previous question. Turning his slitted eyes towards her, Naruto was surprised, and pleased, at her new wardrobe. Where she once wore a blood-red kimono, a new, black kimono stood wrapped around her incredible figure, and if he didn't know better, he could have sworn it was smaller than her last outfit. It had gold outlines, and a gold Chinese dragon wound its way around her body. It began by rising up from her right hip to under her right, then cut through between her, and wound its way up until its head rested on her right shoulder, while its tail wound its way down the hem of the kimono, from top right to its bottom left end. As she twirled around, he found the rest of the dragon. Its tail traveled up from the back's bottom left, from his point of view, to rest just above the junction where her 9 tails fanned out from her outfit. Her black choker had transformed more into a choker of sorts, becoming thicker and higher, taking up more of her pale neck, its blood-red seals easily visible, though a white metal chain link was now clasped at the front of it. While she had previously walked barefoot, she now had white obi socks on her feet, which were easily visible from the wicker sandals she now wore. The same sandals and socks the Shinigami of Bleach use. Her new kimono was in actuality a full battle kimono, one that was created by use of steel fibers. It was a new technique in creating protective clothing, and was also known as steel cloth. This clothing technique made armor that was nearly weightlessness and felt just like silk. It could be made into any type of clothing item, and besides the benefit of near weightlessness, it gave as much protections as wearing a half-inch thick plate of steel armor. It was some of the best, if expensive, clothing on the market for those whose jobs contained certain hazards. Looking her up and down, Naruto nodded silently in approval, before turning on his heel and walking out the door, Kyuubi following quickly behind him. Where to? She questioned. Weapons shop. He replied shortly. Hi, Naruto-sama. And she became silent. However, a final, parting comment from Naruto would give the shopkeeper nightmares for years to come. We were never here. If I find out you told anyone we were, and I will know, I'll feed you to Kyuubi-chan as a snack. Have a nice day. Both of them took to the rooftops to reach their next destination, as it would save them on time, of which they had very little. They reached their next destination, the best weapons shop in Konoha, Higurashi Arms, in several minutes. Both of them landed softly in front of the shop's doors, before entering quietly. A man with chocolate brown hair and a small goatee met them with a cheery hello, and then went back to reading his little orange book, giggling occasionally. All right then, 3 guesses as to what book he's reading. The first 2 don't count. Quickly browsing the shelves, Naruto stripped them of everything he found of value. Since he couldn't carry everything back, he threw it to Kyuubi, who caught it and placed note. She dropped them like pieces of garbage. She's lazy, they were going to resharpen all of the weapons anyway, so who cared if they were dulled now? Them into an ever-growing pile of gear. Here was his list as follows: 1 enormous backpack, 4 kunai holsters, 4 shuriken holsters, 4 tan supply pouches, 3 medic nin equipment pouch belts, 2 chakra knives, 120 shuriken, from the 4-pointed star ones to several fuma shuriken, 80 kunai, ranging from long-range throwers, to double-bladed hand-to-hand combat ones, 40 smoke bombs, 30 cases of both blood-clotting pills, food pills, and soldier pills, 12 rolls of medical gauze, 6 rolls of medical tape, 4 rolls of chakra tape, 2 more sets of fingerless, steel-plated gloves, and extra set of combat boots, 2 full sets of sealing scroll items, which included chakra ink and brushes, 300 exploding tags, 50 smoke tags, 4 chakra weights, 100 blank sealing scrolls, 2 full medic nin kits, a pair of Kamizoro. They're similar to Tonto's, but their blades are so sharp you could drop a hair on them and it would split in half. They're used for their light weight, speed, and precision strikes. A pair of chain scythes, 200 Senbon needles, a battle chain 20 feet in length, a pair of combat knives, and a plain white ceramic mask. After finding what he wanted, Naruto turned towards Kyuubi and asked her if she wanted anything. She replied in the negative, and he simply walked up to the counter to get their pile of stuff paid for. The shop owner himself simply stared dumbfounded at the enormous pile of shinobi equipment in front of his counter, but quickly began to drool as he saw yen signs. After all, it isn't every day you have a costumer buy enough gear to start another shinobi war, and he quickly tallied the kid's purchases with glee. That'll be 750, 983, 874, 972 yen, kid, the man replied. With a small smirk, Naruto showed the man a official-looking document. Charge it to the Hokage. Also, feel free to give yourself a little extra. We were never here, were we? Smiling even more, the man nodded his head and began cackling evilly as he thought about of all the money he had just made. He had allowed the Kyuubi kid into his store because he was an ex-shinobi, and knew all about how the demon's sealing worked, but could care less. The kid was a paying costumer, and he was always courteous to those who paid. It wasn't going to be his fault when the kid cracked and decided to slaughter everyone. He'd been nice to the kid, so he'd hopefully remember his kindness and allow him and his family to leave before the rest of the population would die. It may have been wrong of him to think too negatively of his village, but only biased idiots would treat the only thing protecting them from utter destruction as lower than dirt would deserve their fate once the kid goes insane. It was just a matter of time. Oh well, back to the wonder that was Ika Ika. Outside, Kyuubi-chan, do you know how to create subspace seals? Naruto questioned lightly. Of course. Are you talking about the same seals used for storage scrolls? She asked back. Hi, I want you to put one on my backpack and on all of the blank scrolls, alright? I'll be organizing my new equipment as you do this. Of course, Naruto-sama. She replied, before attending to her task as she quietly watched her master add several items to his clothing. First, he removed his armor and gloves, and used the chakra tape to tape his arms from his wrist up, until they reached the end of his biceps, just below his shoulders. He then strapped his chakra weights to both his arms and legs before re-equipping his armor and gloves. He then strapped 3 medic nin belts around his waist, with 2 of them crossing over his waist and forming an X-like loop. 2 of his supply pouches were strapped to his back hips, and the other 2 were trapped to the sides of his waist. Next, he strapped 2 kunai holsters and 1 shuriken holster to both of his thighs, with the shuriken holster in the middle and the two kunai holsters on opposite sides. He then strapped his remaining shuriken pouches to his uncrossed medic nin belt, added a chakra knife to each of his shoulders on his vest, and then placed his battle chain around his waist. At the back of his waist he strapped both of his kami zoro, their hilts visible at the sides of his waist, and placed in position for a reverse grip draw, and added 2 more combat knives to the undersides of his waist. After he was done, he packed the rest of their stored items, as Kyuubi had sealed the rest of their equipment into the 100 scrolls, and then sealed those scrolls into a single scroll, one that Naruto easily packed away into his backpack, before Naruto left quietly, with Kyuubi following sedately behind him. Ikiruka Ramen, approaching his favorite place to eat in all of Konoha, which was the only place he really could, unfortunately. Naruto let out a small smile as he entered the ramen shop. Yo, Ikiruka Gigi, old man, I'll take a double order of everything you got, shouted Naruto. Startled, Ikiruka turned around with a large grin on his face at the exuberance of his number one customer had for anything that dealt with ramen. He was somewhat shocked, however, to discover that not only was Naruto not dressed in his trademark kill me orange, but in pure black clothing befitting a shinobi, while a white mask was located on the right side of his head. The half-foot growth spurt he'd seemed to have gained overnight was a shocker as well. Completely overwhelmed with the kid's changes, the old man voiced his confusion the only way he could. What the hell happened to you? Long story Gigi, but I'll explain over ramen. Anything you want, Kyuubi-chan. Now, while Ikiruka was a sensible man and didn't think of Naruto as the Kyuubi incarnate, hearing the demon's name still terrified him, and he immediately froze, before turning his eyes towards the beautiful red head in a black and gold kimono towering over Naruto, and trying, but failing to keep his body from trembling as he stared at her red fox ears, and the 9 long tails that twitched behind her. He turned quickly towards Naruto in concern, but waited as Naruto answered his unvoiced question. I let her out after making a deal with her, but she won't hurt anyone. Unless I let her, that is. Sighing in relief, the old ramen chef smiled brightly at his customer. Alright Naruto, if that's what you say. So, Kyuubi-san, what ya want? Beef ramen, please. And thank you for treating my vessel with kindness. She replied with gratitude in her eyes, before bowing slightly to him. Surprise showed on the old man's face, but he quickly sprouted a grin and went to work on creating the best ramen in the world. Ayame, Naruto's here. Come and help your poor old father out with cooking for this ramen-eating monster. He yelled. Coming, yelled back a younger, but defiantly female voice. A 12-year-old Ayame Ikiruka came silently out of the back kitchen, and happily greeted her favorite blonde, though she also flicked her eyes towards the unknown redhead sitting to his left, since it was highly unusual for him to eat with someone else. Hell, she'd never seen him eat with anyone save for her and her father as witnesses. Ohio, Naruto-kun, the older girl yelled joyously to her friend. Ohio, Ayame-chan, replied the blonde quietly. Puffing up her cheeks, Ayame mock pouted at him, before quickly grinning as she noticed the pretty red-haired lady next to him, who slowly ate her own ramen, while as compared to him, entire bowels simply disappeared into his mouth, only to be handed back empty every minute. You're so quiet today. So, are you going to just sit there eating your ramen, or are you going to introduce me to your new friend? Kyuubi's ears perked up a bit at being noticed, but watched her master out of the corners of her eyes to see his reaction to the girl's questioning. Looking up from his 7th empty bowel, Naruto quietly swallowed his mouthful of ramen, before turning his eyes towards Kyuubi, and then back towards Ayame. Her name's Kyuubi. She and I are going on a training trip, and I don't think I'm going to be coming back. I decided to stop here for lunch before we left, as this will be the last time I eat here, the blonde replied quietly. Huh, but, why are you going to leave? Ayame asked in disbelief, and was nearly on the verge of tears as her best friend basically told her that she'd never be able to see him again. Because, Ayame, there are very few people in this village that care about me, and I felt no reason to staying a place that hates my guts for a reason that isn't my fault. The blonde explained carefully, but Ayame still didn't want him to leave. When will you come back? She asked quietly with resignation on her face and was nearly at tears. Her best and first friend was going to be leaving, and it was all the stupid village's fault. Naruto's eyes softened for a bit at her saddened tone, before he continued to talk in a much more soothing tone. I'll come back eventually, for a visit, at least. I will be gone for 10 years at least, but most likely longer. Looking into his eyes to see if he was lying, Ayame found warmth and concern for herself, and calmed as she knew he would come back. Looking closer, she found that he had changed a bit. The outlines of his eyes had darkened and thickened, making them more kitsune-ish as they came to a point near the end tips of his eyes. His pupils had also split and become vertical slits. Looking lower on his face, she found that his whisker marks had become more defined, filling out as well as growing thicker and darker, tapering to a point to become more like slash marks than whisker marks. Altogether it made him look more predatory or feral, but Ayame thought it simply made him look cuter. His hair had become even more untamed, but a pair of black lumps in his hair had caught her attention, as they had stood out, violently contrasting with his blonde hair. Naruto-kun, she questioned, what are those? At Naruto's own questioning gaze, she silently pointed at a spot on his head. Looking up towards the spot, Naruto smirked slightly. They're my new ears. Before his ears twitched and flipped up to show off the black with gold-tipped kitsune ears he now had in his possession, and as an extra, uncoiled his black and gold-tipped tails from around his waist, where they now waved lazily behind him. He sat with a slight smirk on his face as he waited for her reaction, as at the moment she was completely shell-shocked, and simply gaped at him for over a minute. So he simply waited, and then waited some more. She simply stood with her head bowed, and her brown hair covering her eyes. Ayame-chan, are you Gaia? His reply was cut off as a pair of arms snaked their way around his neck and dragged him into the chest of an incredibly excited ramen girl, whose high-pitched squeal of kawaii. The poor fox boy simply lay in a daze, both from the squeal that had shattered his eardrums, which were currently trying to heal, and being crushed against Ayame's chest by death glomp. Now, while this may make it hard to breathe for anyone, the simple fact that while Ayame was only 12, she was an early bloomer, and thus already had a decent-sized chest, well above the norm for her age, which she was accidentally using to suffocate her favorite chibi fox boy. He's so cute, Ayame thought to herself as hugged, death glomped, a currently suffocating Naruto. Now if only Naruto-kun would stay, I could make him all the ramen he could want, and then I could persuade Tsunade to let him live with us, and then when he's older we could, let's leave her thoughts at that, shall we? Unconsciously tightening her grip, a small blush made its way across her face at her incredibly not innocent thoughts about all the fun she and Naruto could have when he was older. Now, why would such a demure, soft-spoken, home-raised girl such as herself already know about that? Blame Ika, and her father becoming senile and leaving the book out accidentally, just for her to find it one day when he wasn't home to stop her from reading it. Yo, ramen girl, sorry to break you out of your thoughts, but Naruto-sama looks like he's on his last legs, spoke up Kyuubi, though there was a light tone of humor present. Huh, was Ayame's intelligent reply, before looking down. The brunette finally registered that her current target of affections, not that he knows this, was turning blue in the face and slowly stopping to escape her grasp. Ah, sorry Naruto-kun. She immediately dropped the nearly comatose blonde, who caught himself on the counter as he steadied himself, taking deep gulps of air as he tried refilling his lungs. Don't, worry, pant cough, about it, cough. He replied to the fusing girl as she apologized to him, before glancing at Kyuubi out of the corner of his eye to see if she was ready to leave. She silently nodded, and he bid farewell to the Ikirukas, allowing only one more death glomp from Ayame as he promised her that if he ever returned, she would be the first one he would visit, before both Kitsune demons left towards the west gate. Walking the final street towards the west gate, both Kitsune were gathering stares and killing intent from Shinobi, but were given distance, considering the demon brat looked dressed to kill. And while the woman beside him was jaw-dropping gorgeous, the killing intent she was generating was surreal, as it was both enormous and frightening as hell. No one was stupid enough to approach the pair, and they had little trouble on their walk, at least until a few rowdy shinobi decided to make it their business to mess with the pair. Oi, demon brat, was a cha doing alls about your lonesomes like this, Sees yas got's a nice lady friend, she's yas caretaker of some thins. Spoke up one of the shinobi, though his slurred speech and unsteady form told her easily that he was drunk. Narrowing her eyes blood-red eyes at the drunk ninjan, as she could smell the alcohol from here, before speaking in a commanding tone, one that brooked no argument and allowed an easy access for her anger. Listen here ninjan scum, if you even think about touching Naruto-sama, you'll pay dearly for it. She growled out from behind clenched teeth. After all, it wouldn't do to lose her temper with such pathetic waste of flesh as them, would it? They were no more than insects compared to her, and were not worth her time or energy. You bitch. All ki gya. The shinobi's threat was ended with a gurgle, thanks to a pitch-black tail that had violently torn its way through his chest and out through his back, splashing several shinobi behind him with blood and gore. Naruto had enough of the shinobi's mouth and had silenced him, permanently. Turning his head towards the now terrified idiots, Naruto's currently blood-red eyes glared at them, while crimson chakra and killing intent seeped from his body. Listen up, bastards. You can insult me all you want, since I'm going to be leaving anyway and I won't have to deal with you pricks anymore. But the moment you decided to lay a finger on Kyuubi-chan, I'll kill you all myself and raze Konoha to the ground. You got that, shit stains? He roared. The drunks sobered up quickly, before rapidly nodding their heads and retreating. Flicking his tail, Naruto flung the currently skewered shinobi off his tail, body landing against a building, before sliding down into a bloody heap. Then, both Kitsune quickly continued their trip. Konohagakure. West Gate. With his hands clasped behind his waist, and flanked by two squads of Anbu, the Sandaime Hokage waited apprehensively for the return of his favorite former ball of sunshine, and his new servant to show up for their appointment. Turning his head slightly, he watched as both Naruto and the Kyuubi approached him, both of them wearing new attire. Naruto was in full black and looked like he could take on an entire shinobi nation, and the Kyuubi had replaced her red kimono with a black one with a gold, coiling Chinese dragon design, which enhanced her red hair and eyes, and reveled just a bit more of her bust than the last one did. Taking his eyes of Naruto, Sarutobi let out a small sigh, as his thoughts became depressing. His surrogate grandson was about to leave, and there was nothing he could do about it. When will you be back? He asked quietly. 10 years. 20 years. Maybe never. Most likely never. However, you send Anbu after me for any reason, and I'll come back for no other reason than to wipe Konoha off the face of this earth. It that clear? Nodding grimly, Sarutobi as he tried memorizing Naruto's face into his memories, as he would most likely never see the boy again. With a slight nod to Kyuubi, Naruto shouldered his pack and turned away, Kyuubi following him sedately alongside him. Watching the two depart, Sarutobi promised himself that if Naruto ever returned, he would be welcome with open arms. It was time for the god of shinobi to show Konoha why they should have listened to him in the first place about the Yondaime's will. Ahead of them, both Kitsune covered quietly. As Kyuubi posted a question, She would invariably change the fates of many people around the world, from the major shinobi villages, to the elemental countries, and several key players in the years to come. Where are we going, Naruto-sama? His own reply was quiet, and he would speak little until they arrived. To Suna, Kyuubi-chan. Here it is. The poll of those females that will show in the story. So far, also, for the women, I will also post the series they're from, and I will post any other series that I think could be of use that are requested by reviewers. Ayame Aikiruka, Naruto, someone already requested her before the second chapter was out. Sweet. Two unimportant Suna Chunin stood outside the gates of Sunagaker, and were bored out of their minds. Now then, it is well known that a bored shinobi is one of the most dangerous things in the universe. Here are just 3 reasons why. You could write a book about why that is, and never finish it in your lifetime. It would not only rake too damn long, but be a complete waste of your time. Just trust me on this. That's why shinobi are always on mission or training. If they don't, they'll get bored, and start inventing things that can make other shinobis live a living hell. Here are 3 reasons why. 1. It was a bored shinobi that invented the Kibaku Fuda, exploding tags. As such, not only did shinobi now become explosion-loving maniacs, but the tags could also set things on fire. Thus, the birth of pyromaniacs. 2. It was a bored shinobi that first found out how to create ninjutsu. And promptly burned down his arch-rival's house with an overpowered kaiten jutsu. Thus, every shinobi now wanted to learn the cool, flash, ninjutsu that could burn down their enemies' houses. This is also another possible reason for the birth of pyromaniacs. 3. It was a bored shinobi that invented genjutsu, which allowed a shinobi to cast illusions that could confuse their enemies, and make them see or sense things that were not real. Or make them think they were on fire. Or they were chickens. That's always fun too. But enough about what horrors bored shinobi can invent, and get back to the good stuff. Like the currently bored Suna shinobi. Shudders at the thought. As it was, a pair of Suna Chunin had decided that watching an endless desert of sand was boring, and were now on a competition of who could win at Jan-Kan-Po, Japanese rock paper scissors. They were currently at a tie, 1,237 times they used the same hand. Both had used rock for some reason. Idiots, you never use the same hand twice. Their game was cut short, as well as their boredom, as they spotted a pair of black dots moving their way across the sand. As the dots approached, they began to take the shapes of 2 people, though one was noticeable shorter. As the distance decreased, the guards' jaws proceed to drop lower and lower, and they felt themselves begin to drool at the sight. Standing 6'1" with red hair that reached past her waist and blood-red eyes with pitch-black, vertical slits for pupils, while a pair of blood-red kitsune ears with gold tips twitched occasionally on the female's head. From behind her lightly waved 9 red tails with gold tips. She held a figure and bust that any women would kill for, and it was only enhanced by the pitch-black kimono with gold tips that lay wrapped tightly around her body, and a large, gold Chinese dragon wound its way across the kimono's front and back. The human form of the Kyuubi no Kitsune is indeed one hell of a woman. However, it was her shorter, menacing-looking blonde companion with pitch-black kitsune ears and several tails with gold-highlighted tips, while being covered head to toe in black clothing that was indeed different, but it was neither the Kyuubi's voluptuous body and alluring presence, or the blonde's bloodthirsty aura or frosty eyes that had them surprised. It was watching the redhead yelling at the blonde kid that made them sweat drop. Naruto-sama, can't we just stop here for a bit longer than that? It's hot. Kyuubi whined to her shorter master. Said blonde ignored her while staring straight ahead of himself towards the Suna gates. Pouting at his aloofness, Kyuubi took a different approach. Please, Naruto-sama, all I want is a nice, cool, bath. Is that so much to ask for from a servant to her master? Smiling devilishly to herself, Kyuubi wound her arms around her master's neck, stopping him mid-step, and comfortably rested her head on his left shoulder. His eyes cold blue trailed over to stare into her own blood-red ones, and his eye twitched as she drew him even closer to herself. The twitching doubled as he felt her sizable attributes pressed even more tightly against his back. He ignored them and focused on his servant. "What do you want?" he replied in a dead voice, though a hint of annoyance was present. He was slightly agitated because of her constant complaining for the last 10 kilometers before they had arrived, and her embrace wasn't helping his mood. "I just want a bath, Naruto-sama. You can join me if you want to," she replied with a grin on her face, and hoped he didn't detect the slight amount of hope and eagerness she had for such an idea. Hearing a couple of thumps, both kitsune turned towards the gates of Suna, only to discover to their surprise that both guards were laid flat out on their backs, and their torso were covered in blood. Naruto's sweat dropped in confusion at the sight, and Kyuubi smiled to herself in satisfaction at the destruction she'd caused. She may be unable to get Naruto to react to her attempts, but the rest of the world's male population wasn't immune to her charms. Using his arms to pry Kyuubi off him, Naruto quietly made his way towards Suna's gates, and Kyuubi followed after dejectedly behind him, as she hadn't gotten an answer from him, and thus assumed he meant no. Seeing the blood-covered Chunin, Kyuubi growled in irritation at not only losing an opportunity with her master, but giving several humans something she only wanted her master to have of her. "Tch. Perverts," she grumbled to herself quietly as she walked past the comatose Chunin. Keeping her eyes on her master, she blinked as surprised as he suddenly stopped outside of a large hotel, and quietly gazed up to it. Turning to her, Kyuubi blushed slightly and held back a gasp at the calculating look in his slitted, cerulean eyes as he locked eyes with her own bloody ones, and he seemed to be quietly searching her for something, though she hadn't the faintest idea why. She felt herself quiver slightly, and her pulse quickened as his blue eyes held her own captivated, before he quietly broke their staring contest. Watching with a slightly dazed expression on her face, Kyuubi stared silently at her master as he sighed, before he looked back up to her with his normal, icy eyes. "After we get checked in, you can take your bath. After that, I need to go." The rest of his sentence was cut off by a position any straight male would kill for, although he could do without the suffocation, as Kyuubi buried her master's head in between her attributes in happiness at getting her well-deserved bath. In her opinion, anyway. Taking his smaller hand into her own, Kyuubi happily dashed into the building, intent on checking in early and attending to her well-deserved bath, even as she dragged an unamused blonde behind her. Stopping with a large smile on her face, Kyuubi drummed her claws on the hardwood counter as she waited for service, and the large gashes in the wood that she gouged out with her claws were startling to the female attendant behind. Her kitsune ears and tails that marked her as a demon weren't helping matters, either. "I would like to request a large room please. Also, I want a suite with a bath. A very, very large bath," Kyuubi requested, even as her eyes glazed over slightly, and a small blush flitted across her cheeks as she thought about all of the fun situations she could have with her master if they had bathtub. "Oh, of course, we still have a larger R room left. However, we, don't have any rooms with, baths left, though." The secretary stammered out, before squeaking in fear as the wood under Kyuubi's claws cracked, groaned, and finally snapped as she applied pressure, crushing it into splinters in her anger. The poor girl only continued to cower as Kyuubi glared at her, and as the vixen's killing aura bled from her body, many of the floor's occupants felt themselves begin to choke as they'd stopped breathing in their fear. The poor secretary could only pray that this demon woman wouldn't kill them all if she accepted her proposal. The hot springs aren't open to the public, or even most paying CCU customers, but, I think we can make an exception. She stammered out quickly. The killing intent vanished, and an extremely happy Kyuubi joyfully picked up their room keys and jumped up the stairs, Naruto following her silently as they landed on the third-floor banister, and quietly made their way towards their room. As she opened the door, Kyuubi's eyes lit up as she gazed at the room's splendor, before they drifted over towards the incredibly large and soft bed, though she noted with interest that there was only a single one. Squealing like a little girl, Kyuubi leapt onto the mattress of her new bed with a burst of energy that was not forthcoming of her earlier, tired state, and was extremely thankful that she wouldn't have to sleep on the ground anymore, even if she could cuddle with her master in her sleep. Squirming around on top of the covers until her head was at the foot of the bed, Kyuubi rested herself comfortably on her elbows, while her head lay on top of one of her hands, and watched with an amused expression as her master quietly entered the room, his eyes flicking constantly as her surveyed the area. It seemed, unfortunately, that he had become more paranoid over the time they'd spent. While she had trained him to be ever watchful, he had taken her teachings to heart, just a bit too much, and now constantly checked his surroundings, even going so far as to cancel genjutsu every quarter of an hour. While though such behavior was just a bit too paranoid, she let him continue it, as it not only helped his chakra control, as genjutsu relied heavily on it, but it also increased his chakra reserves slightly each day. It was nothing more than a drop in the water compared to his virtual ocean of chakra that was his reserves, but it was still an increase, no matter how little it was. Walking towards the tinted windows of their room, Naruto's frozen eyes stared at the full moon, taking in its radiant form, and he felt himself begin to relax, and feel far more calm than he had in a long time. Smiling slightly at his almost relaxed posture, Kyuubi's grin turned devilish as her thoughts took a very naughty route. Naruto-sama. Hearing his name, Naruto tilted his head over towards Kyuubi, and watched as she leisurely sat up from her previously reclined position, though he raised an eyebrow at her downcast eyes in submissive posture. She never acted like this unless she wanted something. What are you up to, I wonder? Naruto thought to himself, before turning fully to her. What is it, Kyuubi-chan? Anyo, that is, would you? Kyuubi muttered quietly to herself, and only mumbled the last part. Naruto didn't hear her, even with his enhanced hearing because of his kitsune ears, and asked her to repeat herself. Would you like to take a bath with me, Naruto-sama? She asked in a soft tone, as Kietel met his eyes with her own. Naruto blinked, and then blinked again. No. What? But why not? Whined Kyuubi at his reply. No. But. No. Please. Kyuubi begged, and unleashed one of the greatest weapons a female has in their genetic makeup. The puppy dog eyes. The small, trembling pout. The shimmering tears in the corners of her eyes, while her hands clasped in front of her chest. Such a pose, combined with her incredible body and exotic looks, would have had any male, or even female, down on their knees begging to do as she asked. Too bad for her, Naruto isn't any normal person. Naruto's eye simply twitched in annoyance. No, he replied in a final tone, hoping that Kyuubi would cease this useless mission of hers. It didn't work, and he was still stuck with her giving him a weird look. He doesn't yet recognize it for what it is. She continued the use of her dreaded eyes, before sighing and giving up, a sad pout on her face as she made her way to the door, and loosened her kimono slightly, as it was very hot and she felt sticky, and thus by allowing her kimono to be loose, she would allow herself to become cooler. Naruto simply watched her silently, before turning back around and beginning to remove his own armor and clothing, and become so engrossed in his task, he didn't notice the slight smirk on Kyuubi's face as she opened the door slightly, before closing it just as softly. Hearing the door open and close as Kyuubi left, Naruto set about removing his vest, and then his under armor shirt, and then began to quickly remove all of his weapons and equipment. After several minutes of changing, he was clad in nothing more than his black combat pants and black headband. Rotating his neck from side to side, Naruto let out a grateful sigh as several bones popped, and he felt himself begin to relax even more. However, his quiet, relaxing moment was abruptly cut off, as a pair of clawed hands ran their way up the sides of his toned abs, before gently resting on his shoulders. He also felt several fluffy tails trail seductively along his biceps and chest, before he felt a warm breath on the back of his neck, and he couldn't help the slight shiver that ran its way down his spine. The two clawed hands had stopped their explorations, as they dropped down and wrapped around his waist. Naruto felt his eye begin twitching more than was most likely healthy, and from his point of view, there was only one thing that had happened. Kyuubi had not left the room like he'd thought. And from the looks of it, she was still hell-bent on getting him to take a bath with her. Fine, Kyuubi. I'll take a bath with you. One bath, and only one. That's it. Do you understand? The blonde uttered in defeat, though he regained his commanding tone at the end. Of course, Naruto-sama. You have my thanks. The redhead replied smoothly, even as her eyes took on an emotion that Naruto was not yet familiar with, but was going to make the blonde's life hell when he got older. Drawing him closer to herself, Kyuubi gently turned him around and led him towards the door, before both of them vanished through it, and made their way to the hot springs. Said hot springs. Naruto narrowed his eyes as he gazed at the hot waters carefully. It was a clever genjutsu, as it had to be a pit full of acid. Why else would they let them use the area for free? A bit paranoid, isn't he, folks? Even as he continued to stare at the water in trepidation, Kyuubi came out from her side of the female side of the hot springs, and snickered quietly to herself at the look on her master's face, and chuckled evilly to herself at the irony of the springs being co-ed. After all, it wasn't every day a hotel had a hot springs, and unseparated baths, and an appreciative smirk made its way across her face as she gazed fondly at her master. He was completely unclothed, save for a small, white towel around his waist, and her crimson eyes traced the curves of his toned muscles, starting from his calf muscles, then up and over his abs and six-pack, though she lingered slightly at his Shinigami seal. Although it wasn't active anymore and held no sway over her thanks to him creating a pact with her, he had left it on himself as a permanent tattoo, symbolizing his status as both a Jinchuriki, and so he would never forget his past. Tearing her eyes away from the seal that had caused both of them so much pain, she continued her muscle tracing, starting at his chest and enlarged biceps, before stopping at his face. As much as it annoyed her that he was so young, and thus was off limits, for now, anyway. Kyuubi thought to herself smugly, he sure as hell didn't act like, though. Even now as he scrutinized the water closely, his face remained blank, even as his eyes turned calculating and light up slightly in emotion, even if it was only for an instant. Smirking slightly to herself, it was replaced by a predatory smile as she stalked closer to her charge, before taking his hand in her own and dragging him over to the shower area, before dumping a bucket of water over her head several times, and she shivered slightly from the cold temperature. After she was done, her master seated himself comfortably on her lap, and she proceeded to douse him the same way she had herself, and she giggled quietly as his body shivered slightly. Afterwards, both kitsune entered the springs, and a pleasured moan made its way from Kyuubi's lips and she sank gratefully into the hot water, and a lazy smile made its way to her face as she relaxed. Beside her, Naruto closed his eyes as he felt himself relax as well, and his ears drooped slightly as he allowed his mind to drift slightly, before his was brought back to the waking world as he felt himself being moved, and a pair of soft arms encircled around his waist, and he was deposited into Kyuubi's lap. Opening his eyes and gazing up at Kyuubi with hooded eyes, Naruto simply waited for an explanation from Kyuubi, as he was too relaxed to protest against her actions. Just relax, Naruto-sama. Am I not far more comfortable than the hard rocks you were sitting against before? She replied quietly, even as she pulled him closer to her body. Normally, She would have tried some slight seduction techniques on him, but he appeared so relaxed, so normal, so vulnerable, that she couldn't bring herself to ruin his moment of peace. Naruto simply watched her for a bit, before his eyes drooped again, and his head fell back against her chest, and a loving smile made its way across the vixen's face as his chest rose and fell steadily, and his pulse quieted, even as his gently breathing announced that he'd fallen asleep. She stayed like this for nearly an hour, her hands gently running across her master's scalp and occasionally running along his sensitive ears as she listened to him sleep, before gently scooping him up in her arms and leaving the springs, before drying their bodies and vanishing to their room. Placing her master underneath the covers of their bed, Kyuubi slipped into a comfortable sleeping kimono, before crawling in and joining her master under the covers. Reaching out and gently grabbing him, Kyuubi brought her master's smaller body next to her own, before winding her arms around his waist, and drew him closer to herself, his back laying flush up against her chest in a spooning position, and she entwined their legs together. Resting her head comfortable on top of his own, Kyuubi felt a content smile make its way across her face as one of Naruto's hand came up and clutched at her arm, even as he burrowed back against her, unconsciously seeking the warmth and affection she was willingly giving him. He may be an emotionless warrior on the outside, but he's still a child that seeks affection. Kyuubi thought to herself tiredly. I'll protect you, Naruto-kun, and I'll give you the love and acceptance the rest of the world won't. I promise, my Naruto-kun. Kyuubi spoke softly to herself as she drifted off to sleep, and even if she wouldn't remember what she'd said, her heart would. Market Square, Sunagaku, 2 days later. Hold it off until Kazekage-sama gets here. We can't let the Shukaku or her Jinchuriki leave the containment area. Hold her. ARRG. Shouted a bloody Chunin, before he was cut off as an enormous arm of sand wrapping him tightly in its fist, until it squeezed him until he exploded in a fountain of gore. Said sand arm belonged to the Jinchuriki of Suna, Sabaku no Gaara. She was a normal-sized girl for her age, though a bit shorter than most 8-year-olds were. Long, maroon-colored hair traveled down the length of her back to reach just above her tailbone, and was pulled into a long, single braid. A pair of gold, agate green eyes were surrounded by large, dark rings, most likely from lack of sleep, and the kanji for love was tattooed into her forehead, though the red coloring indicated that it may have been branded into her skull. A pair of tan pants with several pockets decorating them covered her legs, along with tan shinobi sandals adorning her feet, while a black muscle shirt clung to her small frame, and she wore a fishnet shirt underneath, its sleeves visible due to her former shirt being a sleeveless one. Several yards of tan cloth crisscrossed over her body, from her left shoulder to right hip, then wound around her waist and then to the massive gourd attached to her back, which was quite nearly as large as her entire body. While normally such a child would be considered cute, being the weapon and Jinchuriki of Suna wasn't the greatest person she could be, considering she was hated by the population, and her family, most of them, anyway, only though of her as a weapon or a monster. Her father was the one who sealed the Ikibi no Shukaku inside of her, and because of botching the attempt, he sealed the monster, but killed her mother as well. Because of her status as a Jinchuriki, she would never have a normal life, even if she was the Kazekage's daughter. Currently, however, she was doing everything in her power to slaughter the shinobi in front of her, and her psychotic grin grew wider as she continued crushing them into bloody pulps of flesh, and her green eyes lit up in glee as another one was impaled on several sand spikes, before watching in shock as the sand collapsed, and she felt her link with her sand momentarily severed. Looking up, Gaara narrowed her eyes before glaring in hatred as she stared at her father, and his own face staring back into her own. He was standing on the rooftop of the building in front of her, and his hands were held in a seal, and she could see small wisps of chakra coiling around his arms. They were wind blades, if her guess was correct. Narrowing her eyes, Her sand shot up in tendrils to protect her as several hundred wind blades came screaming at her, courtesy of her father's wind jutsu. After several seconds of the barrage, it ended, and Gaara felt the air leave her lungs as an armored fist slammed into her stomach, before her father punched her in the chest and sent her slamming into a building, but luckily for her, most of her sand took the impact. He'd attacked her so quickly that her sand couldn't keep up, and she cried out as her father slammed into her, before unleashing a barrage of punches that jerked her around and caused the building behind her to crack with each blow, and then shatter as he slammed his foot into her chest, sending her crashing through the building and out onto the street, and she tumbled backwards until she slammed into a building. Covered in bruises and dirt and the remnants of her clothing, which had become trashed, blood ran freely from her forehead and mouth, and she wheezed as she tried breathing, but winced in pain as she did, and thought to herself that some of her ribs were broken. It was a testament to the Kage's power as a shinobi, if could defeat a Jinchuriki so easily, even if it was only a child. Even as he advanced on her beaten and bloody form, Gaara continued to glare at him with her single good eye, as the other was closed in pain. She hated the man for what he done to her, for what he was. Hell, she hated him for being her father. His own face held nothing more than cold acceptance as he stared at his estranged daughter. You are a threat to our village and everything we stand for. I tried to create a Jinchuriki to lead us back into power, but it appears we are unsuccessful, unlike Kumo was. Such a pity. Raising his hand, a blade of chakra materialized, then transformed into a long katana of wind. Bringing the sword down, the Kage watched impassively as he was about to split his daughter in two. Closing her eyes and wincing, Gaara prepared for the pain of a blade cutting into her flesh, before succumbing to the nothingness of death. Clang! The distinct ring of metal on metal caused Gaara to reopen her eyes, and they widened considerably at the sight before her. A blond boy, about a year younger than herself, though he was taller than her, and dressed in black clothing and armor and armed to the teeth, held a short Naginata in a reverse grip, the blunt side of the blade held against his right armored forearm, and it was deadlocked with her father's wind katana. What was amazing to her was that he was no more than a child, but was strong enough to hold back her father, and he was a Kage. It was even more disturbing because he was protecting her, and everyone in the village except her older siblings hated her guts. What are you? The Kage screamed out as blood-red chakra erupted from the blonde's body, and killing intent strong enough to send even his Junin to their knees assaulted them all, the oppressive aura weighing down on their minds and bodies. Kicking the man hard with a boot to the chest, Gaara watched as her father smashed into several buildings before he stopped, and a large warehouse collapsed on top of him. As the blonde turned towards her, Gaara let out a small gasp at the sight. Blood-red eyes with a black slit for a pupil stared into her own, seeking blood and carnage, just like her own blood-lusting eyes. Black-colored, deep-ridged slash marks, 3 of each, adorned each of his cheeks, only adding to his demonic appearance. Nestled in his blonde hair were a pair of pitch-black kitsune ears with gold tips, and flowing behind him, were 4 black kitsune tails with gold tips, twitching and whipping in agitation, like eels out of water. A pair of fangs poked out from his bottom lip, and completed his demonic appearance. When the blonde offered a clawed hand to her, however, the poor girl couldn't take any more stress for the day, and promptly collapsed. Naruto felt himself sweat drop as the girl's eyes rolled into the back of her head, and promptly fainted. Picking her up bridal style, Naruto nodded slightly to Kyuubi, who had watched the spectacle, hidden by the shadows of a nearby building, and both took off to a secluded spot to he could work on his fellow Jinchuriki. Undisclosed location. Opening her eyes, Gaara found herself in the open grounds of a training area. Sitting up, or trying to, anyway, the AMVs container winced in pain as her injuries flared up, but discovered to her shock that bandages were wrapped around her waist and more serious wounds, and her manageable cuts and bruises had vanished. Her sand gourd had been unstrapped from her back and was sitting next to her, and her fishnet shirt and black top laying next to it in a folded pile. Looking around, she jumped slightly as she found the blonde boy from before, though his eyes were now a deep cerulean, and empty of bloodlust. His fangs had also vanished, and he sat on his haunches, talking quietly with a very well-endowed crimson-haired woman wearing a black and gold kimono. She too also held kitsune ears, as well as having 9 tails instead of 4 like the boy, though her fur was colored red, with gold tips at the ends of the tails and ears. Her eyes were also a deep, vivid red color, not unlike that of freshly spilt blood, and they had black, vertically slit pupils. Gaara felt herself shiver, as twin pairs of slitted eyes and kitsune ears swiveled towards her, and the 2 kitsune scrutinized her closely. "Awake, are you?" the blonde questioned. Good. Now then, Gaara, youngest child of the Yondaime Kazekage, and Jinchuriki of the Ikibi no Tanuki, do you wish to become stronger? To show this village who you really are, and not some monster? Do you wish to finally be able to sleep without losing your sanity to the whisperings of the Ikibi? He questioned. Surprised, Gaara nodded cautiously. After all, it wasn't every day someone offered to help her in any way, let alone help her with the Ikibi's ramblings in her mind. A small grin grew on the blonde's face, and it only grew wider as he walked towards her, a small scroll in his hands. Sitting down in front of her, Naruto unfurled the scroll, bit his thumb and drew blood, before it healed up as steam escaped the previously injured digit, and ran it along one of the black kanji encased in it, and with a small poof of smoke, a paintbrush and inkwell appeared, before he set the scroll aside, and Naruto explained to the suspicious girl about what he was about to do. Your seal is incomplete. While the one you have now allows you to have a strong control over the demon's chakra, as well as allowing you access to most of it, it also allows for the Ikibi to communicate with you easier and eat away at your mind and sanity. My seal, however, will allow full control of the demon's chakra, and it will force the Ikibi to leave you and your mind alone. Also, the resealing is going to hurt like a bitch. If your seal was complete, even if it was weak, then you would have been fine, and I would have simply strengthened it. But since it's incomplete, then there will be a great deal of pain. But, if it will let me sleep, I will endure it. Gaara finished. Nodding his head, Naruto dipped his brush into his inkwell, and began rapidly inscribing a vast array of seals that would interconnect across Gaara's stomach. 15 minutes later, he was finished, and Gaara's stomach was nearly black with seals that crossed and crisscrossed one another, and what remained of her tanned skin was taken up by tiny, thimble-sized seals. Putting his brush aside, Naruto's hands blurred as he made 25 hand seals, ending in the ram seal. As he finished, his hands began glowing with blood-red chakra, before Naruto looked back up at Gaara. You ready? Her face sweet in determination, Gaara gave a nod. Breaking his hands apart and then slamming them into Gaara's stomach, a roar of Suna, Jinchuriki, Yuki Tanuki Shiki Fuin. Sand. Power of human sacrifice. Demon Raccoon Dog Death Seal. Seal, followed by a massive burst of chakra, and was promptly followed by a screaming Gaara as she latched onto the closet thing possible to help with the pain, which just so happened to be the blonde Jinchuriki. Screaming as the pain continued, Gaara secured her arms around the blonde's neck and buried her face into the crook of his neck. Her skull felt like it was splitting in two, her spine was being tore out from her back, her insides were boiling, and the intense burning coursing through her body and flesh was, what she believed, her blood burning up and her skin melting off. After several minutes of this, Gaara's screams stopped as a bloody, tearing sound originated from her tailbone and the top of her head, and she felt blood drip down her forehead and from her lower back. Shaking in pain and twitching occasionally, Gaara thanked Kami that it was over, even as her tears and the blood from her forehead mixed as it dripped down from her face. Looking up at her clutching post, Gaara bit back a gasp as she found warmth and kindness, as well as a small bit of satisfaction, gazing back into her own eyes. She felt elated at the look, even a small pit of heat formed in her stomach as blood colored her cheeks crimson. Can you stand? The blonde kitsune asked quietly. Hi. Standing, though shakily, Gaara removed herself from the after-mentioned blonde, only to come face to face with the voluptuous red-haired woman that was with him before, and could only stare in shock as she slammed a clawed hand into her forehead with narrowed eyes. Tearing her hand back, Kyuubi pulled a tawny-haired woman out by her neck from Gaara's forehead, before dropping her at Naruto's feet. She had tawny hair that reached her shoulders, and slitted, gold eyes. She was wrapped in an ornate, tan kimono, with gold lining, and blue leaves as a pattern. Behind her, a single fuzzy, gold Tanuki tail waved, and a pair of small, gold Tanuki ears flicked gently in her hair. Attached at their ends were a pair of white and gold hourglass earrings, filled with sand. Around her neck rested a thin necklace, with a miniature, curved sword attached to it. She had a slim body and waist, and though it certainly wasn't as big as Kyuubi's, she held a larger than average chest. Narrowing her own golden eyes at the young kitsune, sand rose up around her, before shooting out as a large, clawed hands tried to impale him, only to be destroyed by an enormous fireball before it could reach him, turning the sand into superheated glass. Looking towards Kyuubi, the tawny-haired woman gasped and fell to her knees, bowing to Kyuubi. Gaara was confused, however, at just who the golden-eyed woman was, and just who the red-haired had to be, for her to command such respect from her. Rise, Tanuki. I am vexed with you. You may be sealed into a child, but is that any reason to take out your rage at her? You should be helping her, and in the process, get you revenge of the actual ones responsible for your sealing. Kyuubi commanded in a stern voice, even as the women whimpered. Not only that, but you attacked Naruto-kun, and he is important to me and my well-being. Do it again, and I'll kill you. Understand? The women's whimpers increased, before lower her eyes in apologizing to both Naruto and Gaara, even as her voice stammered slightly. Gaara simply nodded in shock, before watching silently as both kitsune turned and began walking away. Wait. Who are you? Why did you help me? Gaara shouted at the retreating pair. Neither stopped, but Naruto's voice floated over to the two Tanuki demons. My name is Naruto Namikaze, and I'm the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi no Kitsune of Konoha. The woman beside me is the Kyuubi herself. And I helped you, because you're just like me. If the Jinchuriki don't stand together, we will fall, and I will not allow others of my kind to live as I've had to. I've already lost my childhood. You don't need to lose your own. With that parting statement, Naruto and the Kyuubi vanished in a puff of red smoke. Looking towards the Ikibi no Tanuki, Gaara made her own decision. I will grow stronger. I fight for myself, and love only myself. When I'm strong enough, I'll come find you, Naruto-sama. You will be the only one who can have my heart. She promised to herself, even as her own red ears with tan tips twitched occasionally, and her single Tanuki tail with tan's tips waved gently behind her. Near the Suna gates, as the pair of kitsune neared the gates, Kyuubi stopped dead in her tracks, and her gaze was rooted on something in the window of a store. Noticing his companion's absence, Naruto turned and to his surprise, found her hands pressed against the glass of a store window, and her eyes locked lovingly on something present there. Sighing, the blonde trudged his way back towards her, before staring in his own slight interest at what she was looking at. A pair of beautiful fans lay open on a pair of cushions. They were small, metal, battle fans, but had been painted to resemble wooden ones. One was a mahogany color, a deep, rich redwood, while the other was the color of ivory, white as the pure driven snow. The pictures painted on each of the insides of the fans were complete opposites, however. The first, the white fan, had a snowy, serene background, with a calm-looking woman seated sedately on the snow. She was clothed in a white kimono, with silver trim and light blue snowflakes as a pattern. She was very pale, and had white hair, nearly the same shade as the snow around her, and her gold eyes with black slits conveyed both warmth and kindness, even if there was no one else in the picture. Nothing was out of the ordinary about her, save the pure white, light blue-tipped kitsune ears, and the 8, white with blue tips kitsune tails behind her, either curled around her knees, or waving gently behind her. The other fan, the red one's occupant, wasn't nearly as nice or serene as her sister. Lounging on a throne composed iron and of various human and demon skulls, was a tanned, black-haired woman clothed in a pure black kimono with deep, red highlights running its length. She gazed out from her position with eyes burning in malevolence, while sporting a seductive smirk on her face that could even put a succubus to shame, and held blood-red eyes with a vertical slit pupil that could entice any man. Simply perfected the image. She had pure black kitsune ears with deep, rich red tips, and 8, black and red-tipped tails that curled around her throne, while lightning flashed in the background. The white fan held the kanji for purity, engraved into its end, while the red fan held the kanji for lust, engraved into its end. Flicking his eyes towards Kyuubi, Naruto watched her as she gazed longingly at the pair of battle fans. "Do you want them?" A nod was all he got from her. "Why? They remind me of 2 friends I had, when I was an overlord of Makai before I came to the human world. The images are near identical to what they look like, as the white-haired kitsune is Hasumi-chan, and the black-haired one is Machiko-chan. Not only that, but, the feelings they give are nearly as accurate as being in their very presences. It was such fun being with them, and I would be grateful if," she trailed off quietly. Staring at her a bit, Naruto turned around, even as he told her to get going. Kyuubi was saddened by his callous attitude to something that would mean so much to her, but dejectedly followed him anyways. Reaching the gates, Kyuubi formed her face into an indifferent mask to hide her pain, but it quickly fell away as a kajbunshin of his walked up to him, before vanishing in a puff of smoke as it handed him a wrapped package. Naruto quickly threw the package to her, before telling her to continue. She blinked in confusion, but continued walking, even as she carefully unwrapped whatever it was that he had given her. She immediately stopped dead, and tears came to her eyes as she found the gift, the pair of battle fans with her 2 friends' likenesses painted onto them. Turning slightly, Naruto asked what the hold-up was, only to be smothered into Kyuubi's bust as she wrapped her arms around his neck, crying as she held each fan in an opposite hand, even as she constantly thanked her master amidst her joyous sobs for getting her such a precious memento to her friends. His own eyes had softened slightly at her reaction, before they quickly retook their glacial texture, and he resumed his leisurely pace as she released him from her happy death grip. Drying her eyes with the sleeve of her kimono, Kyuubi placed her fans into her kimono's sleeves using her subspace technique, while a large smile spread across her face at how much her master cared for her. "So then where to next, Naruto-sama?" Kyuubi chirped happily to her former jailer. Naruto regarded her out of the corner of his eye, even as he thought about his plans. "We'll head north, through Omegakure, then up into Iwagakure. I have a bone to pick with those idiots. Afterwards, we'll head to Kumogakure. They too have their own Jinchuriki, if the Gaara's father was correct, and I'm interested in meeting them. Hi, Naruto-sama. To Omegakure, Iwagakure, and then, Kumogakure. Here it is. The poll of those females that will show in the story so far. Also, for the women, I will also post the series they're from, and possibly include some slight information about them. Unless I know jack squat about them. And I will post any other series that I think could be of use that are requested by reviewers. However, don't ask for Bleach, as I'm going to create a story for that one later. Thanks a bunch for all you ideas. Ayame Ichiraku, Naruto, alright then. The hot ramen waitress that feeds the bottomless pit that's known as Naruto. Someone also requested that she has him whipped when he returns. Well, she be demanding of his time. But, well, ha 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 ha. She will most certainly not be innocent when she's after his affections. She's also his first friend, and will be one of the first of our many ladies he'll be comfortable with. Hinata Hyuga, Naruto, a good, solid pairing. As long as it's not one where they're screwing each other's brains out by chapter 2. Also, the amount of hot Hinata pics you can find is astounding. I'll try finding a few and then post them for your drooling pleasure. Princess Yuki Koyuki, Naruto first movie, a rare pairing, but there are several good stories for this one. Perhaps I'll write a chapter dedicated to them for this story, like my version of the movie, except it will have my ruthless Naruto in it. Sounds like fun. Enko Mitarashi, Naruto. Psycho nymphomaniac with a blood and dango addiction. And she's hot. Need I say more why she will defiantly be in this harem? Kurenai Yuhi, Naruto. Enko plus Kurenai. You do the math. Plus, she's hot. And I've seen quite a few of good Naruto x Kurenai stories, so I think I'll take a crack at it. Female Haku, Naruto, evil grin. Hehehehe. I've got big plans for this one. Count on it. A most defiant, yes, she will be in the harem. She and Naruto fourth movie, loved the movie, and she seemed just a bit interested in our favorite blonde fox boy. So, she's accepted. And the whole looking similar to a mature Hinata, but having a bipolar personality to her is a plus too. There will be a backstory to this one. Yukumo, Naruto, former apprentice to Kurenai, loved the episode where she shows up. Interesting cause I've only seen one fic where she's paired with Naruto. He. I'm starting to feel sorry for poor Naruto. So many women after his heart. Oh well, I don't care. I'm a cruel and sadistic bastard, aren't I? Isaribi, Naruto, fish girl, from one of the filler arcs. Cute. And also kisses Naruto in the canon anime. She was also experimented on by Orochimaru, so the whole experimentation would draw her to Naruto, who's a demon container, and hated for it. Just like her. They're both prejudiced against, so this will work. Hana Inuzuka, Naruto, Kiba's hot, older sister. Think about how much it would piss off Dog Boy if his sister is one of the blonde Kitsune's lovers. And the whole animal canine instincts thing would cause all sorts of funny situations. Or just plain hot scenes too. Oh drat, I just gave out a spoiler. Can you say? Sabaku no Tamari, Naruto, Gaara's older sister. She's hot, and I'm already sending the blonde to Suna, so she'll hear about him from Gaara, and will be interested in seeing just what kind of man it takes to make her psycho sister weak in the knees. To Yuya, Naruto, one of the Sound 5. The redhead who swears. A lot. He. Her cursed seal level 2 is pretty sweet, I think it makes her look even hotter. I'll take a reviewer's advice, and have their relationship build slowly, along with all the interaction with them aka, swearing contests. Shizune, Naruto, Tsunade's assistant. A medic nin and poison specialist. Carries around a pet pig, Tun. Some doctor scenes of her and a full-grown Naruto would be fun. This bears looking into. Tsunade, Naruto, Godime. Blonde hair, brown eyes, and an impressive, upper body. She can also level a house by finger flicking it. Scary as hell, especially when she's drunk, and is losing at gambling. Her age isn't going to be a problem in this story, because I've already worked out a loophole of sorts for her. Did I mention her impressive bust size? Yugo Uzuki, Naruto, Anbu. Wears a Neko mask, has purple hair, and you get to see her face in the anime after the Sandaime dies. The relation's already started, since she's had interaction with Naruto because she was one of the few Anbu who actually protected him when asked. Did I mention she's hot? Kintsuchi, Naruto, hot female Oto Genin from canon. Beaten by Shikamaru in the Chunin exams semifinals. It sucked that she died, so I'm going to let her live. Her attitude is what's going to make her of interest to Naruto. Sasami Fuma, Naruto. I already have a backstory for her planned out. It will be a while, though, before we meet her. Karen, Naruto. Wears glasses, can sense anyone's chakra signatures, has a temper, and is one of Sasuke's fangirls in Shippuden canon. She's not going to be like canon in this story. Did I mention certain internet pics make her look hot? Not only that, but this is also a rare pairing, so I'll take crack at it. She too has a backstory planned out. Also, it will intertwine with the one for Tayuya and Kin. Look forward to it. Komagata Yumi, Rurouni Kenshin, requested. Someone wants her. Sweet. Alright then, author Wu, I give you my gratitude for picking another hot female for Naruto to be chased after. Or stalked. Whatever you people think the multitudes of women are doing, anyway. Plus, her being a mature lady would help the blonde out. Or cause him more problems when she sets her sights in him. Misao Rurouni Kenshin requested. He. Another female ninja, and one with an attitude. I wonder if Naruto can handle her. TCH. Of course he can. He's got Kyuubi under his thumb, so a human like her shouldn't be too much of a problem. Aerith Final Fantasy VII requested. A sweet, gentle girl. Perhaps she can actually calm an enraged teenage Naruto whenever he gets pissed off. Meh. Don't really know. Or do I? Tifa Lockhart, FF7, ha. Oh man, this is going to be so much fun to write with her in the group. Oh well. For everyone who likes Tifa, well, she'll play an interesting part later in the story. Yuffie Kasaragi, FF7 Kunoichi. Has an attitude and mouth to match. Sweet. Also, she throws around a large four-pointed shuriken. Likes collecting materia. Also dislikes men who treat women differently because they're women. Genova FF7 requested. DAAAAAAAAAAMMM, that came out of the ballpark. The extraterrestrial that nearly destroyed Gaia in FF7 and her genes give Sephiroth and the other members of Solidar their incredible power. This wasn't in the original planning, but I think I can find a way to incorporate her. Ayane DOA request. Kasumi's younger half-sister in the DOA series. She was treated as a blight on the Mugen Tenshin's clan's name because of the circumstances of her birth. Quiet, reserved, and extremely skilled in her family's ninjutsu arts, and has a drive to prove herself as more than an outcast that is similar to canon Naruto's. She hates her sister because she was treated differently, but eventually come to a closure with Kasumi around DOA 4. She has white hair and hazel eyes, though her eye color is up to debate. Shampoo Ranma 1/2 Chinese Amazon. Carries around Banbari and easily smashes through walls like they're made out of paper. Also great-granddaughter of Elder Cologne, who's a shriveled-up old monkey woman and incredibly skilled, since she's over 300 years old. There may be some other stuff, like dealing with the cursed springs. There are also several filler female Amazons. Anyone want them too? Or maybe some other Ranma females, perhaps? Liren Tsuyuki requested. Female Yuki, likes fighting. Go look for her information yourself. I don't feel like explaining it. Yuan Tsuyuki requested. Female Yuki with purple hair. Specializes in drugs, medicine and explosives. Ninja wire. Opening parenthesis question mark. A shinobi that uses ninja wire in combat. Revolutionary. I love it. I think it will be similar to Walter's wire using abilities from Hellsing. Yeah, that would work. Ha. Devil May Cry weapons. Send me what you want, though I don't think I'll use firearms, cause that's just too much of an advantage for Naruto. He's already a powerhouse in the making as it is, why take the fun out of him tearing his opponents apart when he could just shoot them? If you want guns, I've got another story in the making that will have Naruto using firearms, but I'm not done with the first several rough draft chapters yet. I'll most likely post the first chapter after my 2 current stories are half done. I don't post often, so it'll be a while. Blame my thrice damned slow typing abilities. And occasional writer's blocks, which are rare. Trish Devil May Cry requested. Created by Mundus to lure Dante to him so his servants would kill Dante in DMV. She's a female demon, and posse's incredible physical strength and lightning abilities. Did I mention she's blonde, looks like a exact clone of Dante's mother, and gives her allegiance to Dante after he frees her. I also think I forgot to mention she's hot. Note the demon aspect of her blood. Possible meeting of her and Naruto when he's in Makai. Sarah's Victoria, Helsing, requested. Blonde-haired, formerly blue-eyed, now red-eyed, voluptuous, female vampire, turned by the vampire, Alucard, in Helsing. She's his servant, but since she refuses to drink blood, he views her as weak and unworthy of his time. She doesn't really like violence and is very sweet, though she can occasionally go into a berserker state where she acts like a real, bloodthirsty vampire. Later in the series, she eventually drinks blood and transforming into a true vampire, and gains incredible power. Did I mention she's hot and cute at the same time? Ninja Gaiden weapons. Interesting. I've played several of the games, so send any weapons or characters you want, and I'll consider them. Archie Klein, Tales of Fantasia, requested. Bubblegum pink hair, and loves flying around on her broomstick, as well as launching spells at people. I'll see if I can work her into the story, not sure yet how I'll be able to do this. Might not actually get into the story, we'll see next chapter. Mint Adnade, Tales of Fantasia, requested. Blonde hair, blue eyes, and is also a healer. See previous reason for her explanation as to why she may be used. Cat Breath of Fire 2 requested. Found several pics of her, so I'm not disappointed. The Catgirl part will be interesting when she and Yugito, as well as the Nibi no Nekomata meet, considering they're all female felines, and they're each fighting for our favorite blonde fox boy's attentions. My word, I'm so evil for doing this. Chizuru Minamoto, Kaneki, requested. It only took a single picture and a brief summary of the anime to not only get interested, but I've gotten a devious idea on how to integrate her, and her mother, and her rival in love into the story. Final notes. Sigh. Finally, done with Chapter 3. Took me a while, but I finished it. 2. Challenger. I have a message for you. Which Sin Lords from which series? And if you send me this info, you got any links that would give me more information about them? Thanks a lot, buddy. 2. Servant of Jashin. I also have a message for you as well. Yes. Naruto will learn to wield that particular weapon that you asked about. If you think on it a little bit, the series I've mentioned so far, either in my disclaimer or in the groupings of girls chosen, you might discover just what type of said weapon may be used. If he's a demon, it's only right that he be allowed a demonic version of said weapon, nay. 2. Whoever this may concern, someone asked that Kyuubi be moved from the slave to mate category. She will be. It's already started slightly with the gift he gave her, but it'll be a while before Naruto starts returning her feelings. Hope all the female Kyuubi fans, and Naruto fans, love the fanservice. AKA, bath time with Naruto. Also, I have no idea where I got that. It wasn't in the original writing, and it was only when I went back to correct things that it suddenly hit me. I should write a scene that deepens the two kitsunes' relationship, and also provides some great fanservice at the same time. I just wrote whatever it was that came flying out of the black hole that is my mind. Meh, that happens to all of us sometimes, right? You're hit with sudden inspiration, and if you don't do something, it will leave very quickly. So, I wrote the hot springs scene. I also can't believe I could write something so feel good and cute. Sigh. Oh well, it made me feel all warm and fuzzy inside as well. Wait. What the am I saying? I am not some author who writes cute stuff. I write blood and guts flying everywhere, explosive action, and hot girls chasing after my favorite male anime characters so they can them senseless. Although, I may do a few more of These's little, calm snippets, from time to time. But don't expect a lot of them. You hear me? I don't write fluff. At least, not very often. Yeah, I switched Gaara's gender. I wonder how many flames I'm going to get for turning this character into a girl. Mhahahaha. You think I care? This is my story. I can do whatever I want. Oh, and another thing. Gaara's still going to be a psychopathic killer. Just a female psychopathic killer. Who has a master complex? Insert maniacal, evil grin. Who do you think's her master? No, really. Don't answer that question. I'm sure you all know who it is. I hope you know who it is. Otherwise, that would really suck. That means I can't insinuate anything if you don't know who her master is. Gaara, you turned me into a girl, you author. So, a person requested it, and I think it would be funny anyways. Gaara, I'm going to kill you. Holds up her hand as sand slithers towards author. Author, yo, Naruto, get your blonde over here and help me. Naruto, and why should I help you? Author, because if you don't, I might let it slip that you actually like Kyuubi-chan. I wonder how she'll react to such information. Naruto glares at author. Gaara, put him down. Gaara, hi, Naruto-sama. Author, he, I so love blackmail. Naruto, review readers, are all sick Kyuubi-chan on you. Gaara, review, and I'll kill you for giving that bastard author more inspiration. Author, ignore Gaara-chan, dodges a wave of sand sent by a screaming mad redhead. Gaara, don't call me that. Only Naruto-sama can. Author, listen to Naruto. I can guarantee the little bugger will find you if you don't. So, yeah, hopefully this chapter will get me some nice feedback. Or not, as the case may be. Yeah, go me. Sorry, but I'm extremely tired. I'll see ya all next chapter. Have fun reading any and all fanfiction, good luck to all those who write it, and have a nice day. Or night, if that's the case.